Airbnb, and the travel revolution. In 2007, two broke designers in San Francisco couldn't pay their rent, so they did something unthinkable. They bought a few air mattresses, set them up in their living room, and charged strangers to sleep there. It sounded crazy, unsafe, unscalable, even laughable. But that scrappy idea, born out of desperation, would eventually become Airbnb, a company now worth tens of billions and responsible for reshaping how the world travels. The question is, how did a couple of air mattresses turn into a global travel revolution, and what can entrepreneurs learn from it? This isn't just the story of a company. It's the story of how Brian Chesky, a design student turned CEO, took on the hotel industry, rewired the economics of travel, and battled crises that nearly killed the business multiple times. By the end of this video, you'll not only understand how Airbnb redefined tourism, but also discover the business lessons that might just change how you think about disruption, trust, and community. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia were industrial designers living in San Francisco, barely scraping by. When they learned a design conference was coming to town and hotels were sold out, they spotted an opportunity. They bought 3 air mattresses, offered air bed and breakfast in their apartment, and charged $80 a night. To their surprise, strangers actually showed up. But turning that quirky idea into a real business wasn't easy. Investors laughed at them. Who would trust random people enough to stay in their homes? The founders were dismissed as naive. Even Paul Graham, the legendary Y Combinator investor, was skeptical until Chesky and Gebbia proved their grit. To survive, they sold custom cereal boxes labeled Obama O's and Captain McCain during the 2008 election, raising $30,000. That hustler mentality impressed Graham, who finally invited them into Y Combinator, giving them $20,000 and, more importantly, credibility. Airbnb's early growth wasn't fueled by billion-dollar ad campaigns. It grew through sheer necessity and word of mouth. Travelers loved cheaper, more personal stays compared to hotels. Hosts loved earning extra income from unused rooms. The company leaned into the power of photography, literally renting cameras and taking professional shots of hosts' apartments to make listings more attractive. It worked. By 2011, Airbnb had over 1 million nights booked. By 2014, it was valued at $10 billion, making it worth more than most hotel chains. Suddenly, this couch surfing with style idea had become a serious threat to the traditional hospitality industry. Hotels fought back, lobbying governments to regulate short-term rentals. Cities questioned Airbnb's impact on housing prices. But Chesky kept pushing forward, framing Airbnb not as just a lodging platform, but as a community movement, a way to belong anywhere. Airbnb's golden years came in the mid-2010 seconds. The company spread to over 190 countries, with millions of listings ranging from tiny apartments to castles and tree houses. For travelers, Airbnb wasn't just about saving money, it was about experiences. You could live like a local in Paris, rent a villa in Bali, or book a quirky yurt in the desert. The company transformed from a cheap alternative to hotels into a lifestyle brand. Chesky himself became the face of millennial entrepreneurship, a design thinker running a multi-billion-dollar company without a background in business. He was obsessed with detail, famously redesigning Airbnb's logo, called the bellow, to symbolize belonging. Investors poured money in, valuing Airbnb at $31 billion by 2017. For a while, it looked unstoppable. But then came the storm. Critics accused Airbnb of driving up housing costs in cities like New York and Barcelona. Neighbors complained about noisy tourists turning residential buildings into de facto hotels. Governments cracked down with stricter regulations, but nothing compared to the existential threat of 2020. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, global travel collapsed overnight. Within weeks, Airbnb's revenue plunged by 80%. Chesky described it as the most harrowing experience of my life. The company had to lay off 25% of its workforce. Bookings vanished. Analysts predicted Airbnb would never recover. But Chesky made brutal yet decisive moves. He cut non-core projects like luxury resorts and flights, refocused on the core mission, hosts and guests, and doubled down on local stays. People may not have been flying to Europe, but they were booking cabins 2 hours outside their city. This pivot not only saved Airbnb, it positioned it perfectly for the post-pandemic travel boom. In December 2020, against all odds, Airbnb went public. Its IPO valued the company at over $100 billion, larger than Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt combined. Wall Street was stunned. Chesky had pulled off one of the greatest comebacks in tech history. Today, Airbnb isn't just about short-term rentals. It's evolving into a travel ecosystem, offering Airbnb experiences where hosts lead activities like cooking classes or city tours. It's also moving toward longer stays, targeting remote workers who can live anywhere. Chesky's vision is bigger than hotels. It's about redefining the concept of home and belonging in the 21st century. So what can we learn from Brian Chesky and Airbnb? First, disruption doesn't always start with billion-dollar ideas. It can start with something as small as an air mattress. Second, trust is the most powerful currency in business. Airbnb had to convince millions of strangers to open their homes to other strangers, something that seemed impossible until it worked. Third, resilience matters more than growth. Airbnb's survival through the pandemic shows that adaptability is the difference between collapse and rebirth. There's also a bigger lesson for entrepreneurs. Never underestimate culture. Chesky's design background made Airbnb more than just a platform. It became a brand people felt emotionally connected to, one that stood for community and belonging. That kind of identity is harder to copy than any feature or app. From air mattresses in a cramped apartment to a $100 billion IPO, Airbnb's journey is one of the most remarkable startup stories of our time. It didn't just disrupt hotels, it redefined travel itself, showing us that sometimes the biggest revolutions start with the smallest, scrappiest ideas. So let me ask you, do you think Airbnb is the future of travel, or will it eventually be crushed by regulation and competition? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed this breakdown of Airbnb's wild ride, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next big business story. Because one thing's for sure, the way we travel will never be the same again.